Lord Lucan murdered her, thinking she was his estranged wife, Lady Veronica Lucan.
For 50 years, Lord Lucan's name has been whispered like a curse, a British aristocrat who vanished after a brutal crime, leaving behind nothing but blood and mystery detectives searched.
We're still looking for Lucan all over the world, and we must endeavour to find him alive or dead.
Theories multiplied, and the world moved on. Or so it thought. Now, newly uncovered DNA evidence has done the impossible. It's cracked the case wide open. But what if Lucan didn't die that night in Belgravia? What if he escaped, built a new life, and watched his legend grow from the shadows? The answers DNA just revealed are darker than anyone expected.
Lord Lucan was a criminal psychopath whose actions produced one of the great scandals of the 20th century.
Aristocrat turned gambler. Richard John Bingham was born into British nobility in December 1934, carrying the title of the 7th Earl of Lucan. He grew up in wealth and privilege, the kind that came with private tutors, polished manners, and connections most people could only dream of. His education at Eton College, one of England's most elite schools, set him on a path meant for prestige and influence. After school, he served briefly in the Coldstream Guards, a regiment known for discipline and ceremony, which suited his aristocratic background. Behind all that charm, Lucan was never truly at ease. The excitement of risk drew him in, and soon he traded the life of duty for one of glamour and gambling. By the early 1960s, he was a familiar face at London's exclusive clubs, sipping expensive drinks while trying his luck at high-stakes games. He developed a taste for roulette and backgammon, betting sums that could buy most people a home. In 1963, he married Veronica Duncan, a beautiful socialite who quickly became the Countess of Lucan. Together, they had 3 children and moved into a grand house in Belgravia, one of London's wealthiest neighborhoods. From the outside, they looked like the picture-perfect couple, elegant, well-connected, and living the kind of life that made headlines. But inside 46 Lower Belgrave Street, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Lucan's gambling losses were piling up, and his obsession with money began to strain the marriage. The once charming aristocrat was turning into a man burdened by debt and desperation. Friends noticed his temper growing shorter, his mood darker. What started as a pursuit of thrill and luxury slowly began to unravel into something much more dangerous. The night of the murder. It was the night of November 7th, 1974, and inside the grand townhouse at 46 Lower Belgrave Street, something terrible happened. Sandra Rivet, the family's young nanny, had gone downstairs to make tea around 9 o'clock that evening. She never came back. Moments later, she was brutally attacked in the dimly lit basement, struck several times with what investigators later believed to be a piece of a lead pipe. The blows were fatal. Upstairs, Lady Veronica Lucan began to worry when Sandra didn't return. She decided to check the basement herself, only to come face to face with her attacker. In the struggle that followed, she was struck on the head but managed to fight back and escape the house, running bloodied and terrified into a nearby pub to call for help. When police arrived, they found Sandra's body wrapped in a mail sack, lying in a pool of blood. Almost immediately, suspicion turned toward Lord Lucan. His wife had identified him as the man who attacked her, and evidence inside the house seemed to point in the same direction. Investigators discovered blood spatters, hair, and signs of a violent struggle. Hours later, Lucan's car, a Ford Corsair, was found abandoned near the port of New Haven in East Sussex. Inside were traces of blood matching both Lady Lucan and the nanny, along with a length of lead pipe similar to the suspected murder weapon, but Lucan himself was gone. Witnesses recalled seeing him earlier that night at a friend's home in Uckfield, looking pale and shaken, saying there had been a terrible catastrophe. After that, he vanished completely. No one saw him board a ferry, buy a ticket, or make contact again. The crime shocked Britain. Newspapers plastered his face everywhere, calling it the downfall of an aristocrat. How could a titled man from one of London's most respected families end up at the center of such horror? The brutal killing of Sandra Rivet and the disappearance of Lord Lucan turned what was once a domestic tragedy into one of the country's most enduring mysteries that still fuels theories half a century later. The inquest and presumption of guilt. By the time the inquest took place in 1975, Lord Lucan had already been missing for months, and the public's curiosity had turned into a full-blown obsession. The courtroom inquest into the death of Sandra Rivet became a national spectacle. Reporters packed the gallery, sketch artists captured every expression, and the story dominated headlines across Britain. This was not just about a murder, it was about a nobleman accused of committing a brutal crime, then vanishing without a trace. Because Lucan was still missing, the proceedings were held without him. Witnesses described the horrific events of that November night, and the evidence painted a weird picture. Police officers detailed what they found inside the Belgravia townhouse: blood-stained floors, signs of struggle, and the mail sack containing Sandra's body. Forensic experts testified about the blood traces found in Lucan's Ford Corsair, linking them to both the nanny and Lady Lucan. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Lady Veronica Lucan herself, still visibly affected by the attack. She described how she had been assaulted after going downstairs to check on Sandra, and how she saw her husband in the basement holding what looked like a metal pipe. Her account shocked the court. She told them how she had escaped and run to a nearby pub for help, fearing that her children upstairs would be next. With Lucan's absence and the weight of evidence before them, the jury took little time to reach a decision. They found that Sandra Rivet had been murdered by Lord Lucan. It was the first time in British legal history that someone had been formally named a murderer at an inquest without being tried in court. Still, the verdict left behind more questions than answers. Where was Lord Lucan? Did he take his own life after realizing what he had done? Or did someone help him flee the country? Police searched far and wide, following tips from across the globe. Some believed he had jumped from a ferry near New Haven and drowned. Others claimed he had escaped to Africa or South America, living quietly under an assumed identity. The absence of a body only deepened the mystery. With every passing year, rumors grew, sightings multiplied, and the legend of Lord Lucan turned from a tragic crime story into a lasting piece of British folklore. Early investigations and sightings. After Lord Lucan vanished in November 1974, the immediate police investigation was intense. But as days turned into weeks and then months, leads began to dry up. Scotland Yard conducted door-to-door inquiries in Belgravia, interviewed friends and acquaintances, and checked travel records at ports and airports. They even examined sightings across Europe, but nothing concrete ever came of it. The case slowly transitioned from an active search into a long-term mystery. Over the following decades, alleged sightings of Lucan popped up all over the world. Some people claimed to have seen him in Africa, living in small towns far from the limelight. Others said he had been spotted in Australia, blending into local communities. There were even rumors of him turning up in South America, quietly living under an assumed name. Most of these claims were never verified, but they kept the public fascinated, and the media intrigued. Newspapers printed letters from supposed witnesses. Travel records were scrutinized, and amateur detectives tried to piece together his trail. Lucan's connections as an aristocrat only added fuel to the speculation. People wondered if he had friends who helped him disappear, or if his social network had provided him with financial resources to vanish without a trace. Even decades later, former staff, family friends, and journalists told stories hinting at mysterious phone calls, unexpected letters, or fleeting glimpses in remote locations, all of which kept the legend alive. Despite the frenzy, official police investigations gradually wound down. Scotland Yard eventually closed the case as unsolved. Citing a lack of verifiable evidence, they maintained records in case new information surfaced. But the reality was that after a certain point, pursuing the case became more about following rumors than hard facts. Still, the disappearance never fully lost public attention. Documentaries, books, and television programs kept the story in circulation, speculating on everything from a suicide to a secret escape abroad. Even with the case technically closed, Lucan's vanishing act became a blueprint for public obsession with missing aristocrats. The combination of wealth, status, and a violent crime created a mystery that refused to fade. People still talk about him, still wonder if he truly escaped justice, and still debate every possible lead, even decades later. Legal step: death certificate granted. On February 3, 2016, more than 40 years after Lord Lucan vanished, a London court took a significant legal step. The court issued a presumption of death certificate for him, a decision that allowed his son, George Bingham, to officially inherit the title and become the 8th Earl of Lucan.
The court this morning declared Richard John Bingham, my father, known to most people as Lord Lucan, as to be dead for all legal purposes from 1981.
For George, it was a formal acknowledgement of something the family had been living with quietly for decades. The absence of his father had left a void in more ways than one. The court process was careful and deliberate. Judges had to consider all available evidence, from police reports to witness statements, and even theories about possible sightings abroad. They weighed the passage of time, the lack of contact, and the impossibility of proving Lucan's continued existence. Ultimately, the law allows a presumption of death when someone has been missing for a prolonged period, and there is no reliable evidence that they are alive. In Lucan's case, the gap of over 40 years was more than sufficient. It is important to understand what this certificate actually represents. It was not a declaration of what happened to Lucan on that night in November 1974. It did not solve the mystery of his disappearance, nor did it confirm whether he died shortly after vanishing or managed to escape and live elsewhere. Instead, it was a legal mechanism designed to address practical matters: inheritance, property, and the continuity of titles within the peerage. Without this certificate, George would have faced complications in claiming the family estate and carrying on the responsibilities tied to the earldom. The granting of the presumption of death also provided a kind of closure for the family, even if it did not answer the lingering questions. It helped them move on with their lives, at least in a legal and social sense. But for the public, the story was far from over. Historians, true crime fans, and curious minds continued to be drawn to the mystery. The certificate ended one chapter, but the question of what really happened to Lucan still lingered. The forensic groundwork. The investigation into Sandra Rivett's murder relied heavily on forensic work, which at the time was still developing as a science. One of the key figures in the case was Margaret Pereira, a highly skilled forensic scientist known for her meticulous attention to detail. Her work earned her the nickname Miss Murder because she often handled some of the most complex and high-profile cases in Britain. Pereira was called in to examine the Lucan family home and the car that Lord Lucan had abandoned near New Haven. At the townhouse, she carefully analyzed blood smears, stains, and splatter patterns. Each mark told a part of the story: the direction of the blows, the force used, and the movement of the victim and attacker during the struggle. Every drop of blood was documented and photographed, creating a record that would later be crucial in the inquest. The level of detail Pereira brought to the investigation helped confirm that a violent altercation had taken place, and supported the accounts given by Lady Lucan and other witnesses. Pereira's work extended to Lucan's abandoned Ford Corsair. The vehicle contained traces of blood that matched both Sandra Rivett and Lady Lucan. Investigators examined fingerprints and other trace materials, and the forensic evidence indicated that the car had been used in connection with the attack. The discovery of a lead pipe in or near the car linked the vehicle to the suspected murder weapon. Although this did not prove Lucan's fate, it strongly tied him to the crime scene and gave police a concrete basis to build the case. These early forensic links were primarily circumstantial, but they were compelling. They provided the first clear scientific connection between Lucan and the murder, going beyond witness statements and hearsay. At a time when DNA analysis was not yet in widespread use, the meticulous documentation of blood patterns, fingerprints, and trace evidence represented the cutting edge of criminal investigation. While the evidence painted a detailed picture of what had happened inside the house and in the immediate aftermath, it did little to answer the biggest question: where had Lord Lucan gone? Survival conspiracy theories. Over the years, a lot of people refused to believe that Lord Lucan had simply vanished or died after the murder of Sandra Rivett. Some investigators and independent researchers said that he might have escaped and remained alive, quietly living somewhere far from Britain. In fact, an internal Metropolitan Police document from 2002 reportedly noted the possibility that Lucan could still be alive, showing that even official sources hadn't completely closed the door on the idea. This alive hypothesis captured the public's imagination and fueled a host of theories. Some believed that Lucan had received help from friends or family members, allowing him to slip away unnoticed. Others suggested that he had changed his identity, possibly moving to another continent to start a new life without anyone recognizing him. Stories circulated of a man fitting his description being spotted in remote towns in Africa, Australia, and South America. None of these sightings was ever confirmed, but they kept the mystery alive for decades. The theory also sparked countless conspiracy theories. Some wondered if British high society had helped cover up his disappearance to protect the family name. Others speculated about secret identities, fake deaths, and hidden safe houses. Newspapers and television programs often ran features highlighting alleged sightings and interviews with people claiming to have crossed paths with Lucan. Every unverified report added to the legend, blending fact and speculation in a way that made it difficult to separate truth from fiction. Even law enforcement had to acknowledge that while these sightings were mostly anecdotal, it wasn't just a question of murder anymore. It became a story about identity, privilege, and the limits of policing, showing how a single act could ripple through decades of speculation. New DNA claims surface. In January 2025, Neil Berriman, the son of Sandra Rivett, claimed he had discovered new DNA evidence that links Lord Lucan to fingerprints at the scene of his mother's murder. He said that modern touch DNA techniques, which can extract tiny traces of sweat or skin cells left behind in fingerprints, made it possible to connect Lucan to the crime. Berryman believes this discovery not only proves Lucan's involvement in the murder, but also suggests that he may still be alive and living somewhere in the world. He pointed to past alleged sightings of Lucan in places like Australia and South Africa, and argued that the former Earl could have used his wealth and connections to disappear without being caught. It is important to understand that these claims have not been verified by any official forensic laboratory or police investigation. There is no public record showing that law enforcement has confirmed Berryman's findings or included them in any active case. The reports make clear that this is his personal claim, not an official statement from investigators. Scientifically, extracting DNA from fingerprint deposits is possible and has been used in certain criminal cases. Berryman says this is how he obtained the evidence and believes it could be a breakthrough decades after the murder. However, proving a private claim like this in court requires verification, proper handling of evidence, and independent review. This new development adds another chapter to the long-running mystery of Lord Lucan. It gives the impression that there could be new forensic proof finally pointing to the truth. Still, without official confirmation, independent testing, or legal action, the claim remains part of the legend surrounding Lucan, rather than an established fact. DNA breaks silence. The possibility that DNA evidence could finally uncover the truth about Lord Lucan's mystery grabbed everyone's attention. According to reports, the analysis of fingerprints and other forensic material from the original crime scene appears to link directly to Lucan. What makes this reveal so disturbing is the idea that he might have survived, taken on a new identity, or planned his escape so well that he completely avoided justice. If these claims hold up, it changes the story completely. For decades, people speculated about whether Lucan had died soon after vanishing, or whether he had managed to flee abroad. Now, the possibility that he not only survived but remained free for so long turns the entire narrative on its head. It suggests a man who committed a brutal murder and then used his resources, connections, and social standing to vanish without facing consequences. The bad part of this revelation is clear in two ways. First, the crime itself went unpunished for decades. Sandra Rivet lost her life, Lady Lucan suffered serious injuries, and yet the perpetrator was never held accountable. For families and friends, that is a haunting injustice. The second aspect involves the system itself. Lucan came from one of Britain's wealthiest and most influential families, and many people believe his status played a role in his ability to evade capture. His aristocratic connections, financial resources, and high-profile social network may have created a shield, allowing him to disappear while law enforcement struggled to find any trace of him. This combination of a violent crime and the apparent ability to escape accountability strikes at the public's sense of fairness. The story becomes more than a mysterious disappearance. It becomes a case study in how privilege and planning can intersect to protect someone from the consequences of their actions. Implications of the DNA revelation. If the DNA evidence is accurate and Lucan is confirmed to be alive, it creates a remarkable and troubling situation. Legally, his conviction for the murder of Sandra Rivet from the 1970s would still stand because the Inquest formally named him as the killer. However, the fact remains that he never faced a trial or served any punishment. In practical terms, the crime was acknowledged, but justice was never fully delivered. This situation shows how much social class and privilege can influence outcomes. Lucan was a member of the British aristocracy, and his wealth and connections may have played a role in his disappearance going unresolved. For decades, rumors swirled about sightings abroad, secret identities, and escape plans. While law enforcement struggled to track him down, the inability to locate a body only added to the intrigue and reinforced the sense that a wealthy, well-connected individual could avoid accountability in a way that ordinary citizens could not. Beyond the personal tragedy, the case raises broader questions about inequality in the justice system. A man accused of brutal murder could potentially live out his life freely, while ordinary people in similar circumstances would face legal consequences. The public fascination with the Lucan case reflects more than curiosity. It also taps into a sense of injustice. People are drawn to the story because it combines elements of crime, mystery, and class, all wrapped up in the real-world consequences of privilege. In many ways, the DNA revelation forces a reckoning with decades of unanswered questions. It challenges the idea that time alone resolves cases and shines a spotlight on how wealth, status, and social networks can influence outcomes. For historians, true crime enthusiasts, and the general public, the implications are profound. Closure for the victims and family survivors. For Sandra Rivett's family, the identification of Lord Lucan as the murderer, even decades after her death, offers a form of long-awaited clarity. While it cannot undo the tragedy of losing a loved one, it confirms what they had suspected all along. Knowing who was responsible allows them to close a chapter of uncertainty that had lingered for more than 40 years. Every unsolved detail, every rumor, and every alleged sighting could finally be tied back to a single individual, giving the family a sense of resolution that had eluded them for decades. For Lucan's children, the situation is more complicated. The title and responsibilities of the earldom passed on to George Bingham, the 8th Earl of Lucan, in 2016, after a presumption of death was granted. While they inherited the title and estate, the truth about their father's actions and his possible survival casts a shadow over the family legacy. Questions about his whereabouts, intentions, and the way he might have used his social position to disappear complicate the narrative of their family history. For the children, it is a mix of legal closure and personal ambiguity as they navigate the complex emotions tied to a parent accused of a violent crime. From a societal perspective, the renewed attention on the case underscores the broader implications of justice and accountability. Cold cases rarely receive definitive answers, especially when powerful or well-connected individuals are involved. This revelation, however, shines a light on the idea that even the wealthy and influential can be linked to serious crimes through evidence and investigative persistence. For the public, it reinforces faith in forensic science and modern investigative techniques, showing that truth can emerge even after decades of uncertainty. Ultimately, the reopening of this case and the potential confirmation of Lucan's identity as Sandra Rivett's killer resonates across multiple layers. For the victim's family, it is about closure and certainty. For Lucan's descendants, it is about reconciling inheritance with a complicated personal legacy. For society, it is a reminder that accountability can reach across time and social barriers, offering a rare example of resolution in one of Britain's most infamous mysteries. The unanswered questions. Even after all these decades, the story of Lord Lucan is full of questions that may never be fully answered. If the recent DNA claims are accurate, and Lucan is indeed alive, the biggest mystery becomes his whereabouts. Where could he be hiding after all these years? Has he assumed a new identity? Perhaps living quietly in a remote location, or blending into a community far from the reach of authorities? And if he is alive, who might have helped him disappear? Friends, family, or networks of privilege could have played a role in orchestrating his vanishing act, allowing him to avoid capture and live under the radar for decades. Another set of questions focuses on the logistics of survival. How did Lucan manage to live undetected for such a long period? Did he have access to significant financial resources that allowed him to remain anonymous? Was he constantly moving between countries, or did he settle somewhere safe? Even the most meticulous escape would have required careful planning, resilience, and an ability to avoid leaving a trail. For decades, investigators and amateur sleuths have speculated on these possibilities, trying to match sightings and rumors with any verifiable fact. On the other hand, if the DNA claim turns out to be false, it raises entirely different questions about modern forensic science and the public's fascination with unsolved mysteries. The idea that touch DNA can reveal long-hidden truths is compelling, but unverified claims can feed speculation, hype, and even misinformation. It shows how easily the public can be drawn into the allure of a dramatic breakthrough, especially when it involves a high-profile crime, a vanished aristocrat, and decades of unanswered questions. Regardless of whether the DNA evidence is confirmed, the Lucan case highlights human curiosity and the desire for closure. People want to know the fate of both the victim and the accused, and they are drawn to stories that challenge their assumptions about justice, privilege, and accountability. The mystery endures because it combines a brutal crime with unanswered questions that stretch across generations. For every new claim or reported sighting, the story gains another layer, ensuring that the legend of Lord Lucan continues to intrigue, frustrate, and captivate the public imagination. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.